Welcome in to Check the Mic. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. It's time for our NFC West preview. Of course, the first three previews, we're cranking them all out. We're cranking out all of our previews here, Sam. Division by division over here on the new feed. We appreciate you if you've come over from the PFF NFL podcast, or if you're new, we appreciate you. If you just found us, hit that subscribe button wherever you listen to the podcast or here on YouTube. Sam, it's NFC West time, and we've been going... When we go team by team, we like to talk about best and worst case scenario, little off-season overview, some of the additions, big storylines, some key position groups, and then we'll hit it up with the predictions at the end of the show. Ready to go?
Let's go.
All right, let's start with the Arizona Cardinals in the NFC West. Second year for Jonathan Gannon as the head coach. A team that didn't win a ton of games last year, but that was kind of the expectation, right? Kyler Murray was hurt for the majority of the year. They knew that going in. They set it up as a rebuilding season. So high level, what are your thoughts on Arizona now from a roster standpoint heading into 2024?
Yeah, and I think they were kind of quietly impressive last season, even without a quarterback for most of the year. And then when Kyler Murray came back, he did make a significant difference. They gained a lot more yardage with him as the quarterback. They were better on third downs. They were just better across the board. And now they've added weaponry. Marvin Harrison Jr. is one of the best wide receiver prospects to enter the NFL in a long, long time. And he has the chance to have that kind of transformational impact that, say, a Jamar Chase had on the Cincinnati Bengals. It's very difficult to overstate the potential impact that dropping a genuine difference-making number one wide receiver has on an offense. And if Harrison is that guy, the bloodlines are there, the acrobatic skills are there, the catching, just the ball skills are there, and he's more than athletic enough. So if Harrison is that difference maker right away, I love what that does to a guy like Michael Wilson, who can take a step down the depth chart, was quietly good as a rookie. He can be, I think, really effective now as a number two. Trey McBride, a tight end, had a breakout season and could be an impact player. The backfield is strong. The offensive line, it's okay, but I think it's in that creep back toward average, more than good enough to let everybody else do their job type of bracket. Quietly, I think that this Cardinals offense could really surprise some people and actually be a really good unit quite quickly.
Yeah, I can't wait to see Marvin Harrison Jr., especially after an offseason where he just kind of quietly, he didn't do much as far as workouts or anything, while Malik Neighbors went out there and did all the running, did all the jumping, and tore it up and looked explosive. But I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to hit the ground running as a really polished route runner who just understands the game, of course, with that pedigree. You mentioned Trey McBride, an absolute monster down the stretch. And I think you summed up the offensive line the right way. They bring in Jonah Williams, to play right tackle. Paris Johnson over at left tackle now was, he keeps changing positions, going from guard to right tackle to left tackle, but it's year two for Paris Johnson, who had a solid rookie season. I think they'll be okay up front. My big question is going to be Kyler Murray now and what he is at this point. I think there was a point where he was on his way to being in that top 8 quarterback discussion. Remember, it was pretty incremental growth in his career. 2019, he's drafted. He's all right. 20, he takes a big step forward. And 21, Arizona's doing some damage, right? He's playing really well. They're running the ball with him a little bit more during those couple of years in Cliff Kingsbury's offense. And then in 22, it looked like he kind of took a step back. You weren't getting some of those big-time throws, those downfield shots that Kyler had been known for. And then he gets hurt at the end of the year, and we just saw him finally get comfortable, I think, last year, week 17 and 18, toward the end of his run. So can Kyler even get back to where he was? His peak years, his highest PFF grades, 2020, 2021. I think that coincides with the stats and everything. That was where Kyler was at his best. Can he get back on track? Because if he can, all those pieces you mentioned, I think you've got the makings of a pretty good offense.
Yeah, I mean, everybody thinks about Kyler Murray as, this athletic quarterback, a rushing threat, a guy that scampers all over the place and makes some acrobatic plays. But I think the really important season for him in terms of projecting forward what he can be is that 2021 season. If you go back and look at those PFF data points, those big time throws in that PFF Plus subscription, like the big time throws back in 2021, he had 41 of them over a season. That's a huge number. In terms of big time throw rate, how often was he making those big plays? That 8% is a monster figure. That's like double a solid big time throw rate. So not only is he athletic, not only is he able to improvise and make crazy plays happen, but he's able to make explosive plays with his arm in a way not many quarterbacks in the NFL are capable of doing. You then add, Marvin Harrison Jr., like a competent receiving core to that. You add Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson, Trey McBride. That has all the recipe for this to be a not just productive, but a genuinely explosive and scary offense for defenses to try and contain. I'm not saying it's a guarantee he's going to get there, but he's at least shown already in the NFL that he's capable of that kind of production. And now we just need to see it all come together now that he's healthy, now that the situation around him is better, the scheme is better. Like, the pieces are all there for this to come together.
Yeah, I mean, the pieces are absolutely there. And I think it's kind of a pivotal year for Kyler. He's now making he's only making $46 million a year. That just keeps getting dropped lower and lower as far as APY goes for quarterbacks around the league. But I think it's a pivotal year for Kyler, continuing to prove, hey, I'm another year removed from the injury. The total package coming back as a run pass threat. I think he has that ability. Defensive side of the ball, though, Sam, I've got some concerns. I think there's reason for concern and then reason for, hey, let's see some young players that they brought in with the plethora of draft picks. Last year, Cardinals had the 4th worst PFF pass rush grade as a team, 4th worst coverage grade as a team. And I don't know if they've upgraded during this offseason. So it is this unknown of several draft picks, particularly in the secondary, that they're going to be banking on. Up front, they draft Darius Robinson as their second first rounder. I think he's got that inside-outside flexibility, but that defensive front looks rough. Even with Robinson there, I think they've got some work to do on the defensive side of the ball. And, coming from a place where they were one of the worst defenses in the NFL last year.
Yeah, and I think to a degree that's inevitable, right? They can only fix so much in an offseason. They did the thing that you generally praise in terms of roster construction and how to build a team. They did it through the draft. They drafted a lot of times. And okay, all those guys aren't going to work out, but if they get enough of them to hit, that's what's going to propel them going forward. Obviously, if they get their high-end picks, a guy like Darius Robinson, if he hits right away, that's a positive thing and an important thing for this defense. But, they just need a few of those guys to actually make an impact and upgrade that side of the ball because, every level of that defense is concerning. The front, there's a very definitive lack of consistent production, guys that you can rely on getting significant pressure. Their top pass rushers effectively are former special teamers, former off-the-ball linebackers, tweeners like Darius Robinson who are unproven at the next level. There's just nobody that you could point to and say, that guy is going to get you 55 pressures this year, and we just need to get the rest from somewhere else. Linebacker is a work in progress. Cornerback is a work in progress. Like, every level of this defense is on paper a weakness, but I think the bigger thing for the team as a whole is if the offense gets on the right track, if Kyler Murray looks legit, if Marvin Harrison looks great, if the offense is explosive and has firepower, we can work on the defense over the next couple of years.
Please don't diminish the exploits of Dennis the Barbarian Gardeck, a show favorite, of course. Now, he had 4 sacks in 5 weeks last year.
Yeah.
Slowed down a little bit. Only had 1 after that, but still a good fun player. You just don't want him as your top pass rusher. Darius Robinson's intriguing. That's why he went in the first round. He wasn't a dominant player in college, but they moved him inside and outside at Missouri. He went to the Senior Bowl, had really an outstanding week at the Senior Bowl in one-on-ones, and he's got that length and kind of old school 3-4 type of feel, I think, to cause some problems. So I would just say the defense is in a bit of a transitional stage. You also have Gannon there. Again, when the Cardinals were, hanging tough with Josh Dobbs at quarterback last year and in a bunch of these games that they probably shouldn't have been, got to give Gannon a lot of credit, given how overmatched they were from just a personnel standpoint. They drafted 2 corners who are really athletic, have upside in Max Melton and Elijah Jones Melton out of Rutgers, Elijah Jones out of Boston College. Dadrian Taylor Demerson, making some plays in the preseason at safety. He was a 4th-round pick out of Texas Tech. So I think a lot of these young defensive players, you throw Starling Thomas, what number is he? 5th or 6th? What year is he?
5th.
Which
Fifth.
iteration is he?
The 5th.
Starling Thomas, the 5th. There's a big V. He's got a chance to play in year 2. It is a young defense. It feels like a transitional year, though, for this defense. And if some of those young players hit, you're looking at, hey, next year, maybe they have something to build upon.
And Garrett Williams as well. 2nd year for him. He missed a lot of his rookie season, or was coming back off a significant knee injury in his rookie season. So it's a big year too for him potentially to be a contributor. Yeah, it's really young, this defense. And it's a positive thing in terms of we always associate youth with potential and what they could be. Look, it's not just a really old, haggard, useless defense. It's not good looking on paper, but it is at least stuff full of young players who could theoretically, all improve in a significant way. And somebody somewhere might actually put their hand up and say, yeah, we're going to be part of this thing and be a high level unit going forward. It's just that it's very difficult to talk yourself into the same kind of optimism on the defensive side that you can for the offensive side.
So that's part of my best case scenario then is, those offensive pieces we talked about. Kyler gets back to 2020-21 levels. Marvin Harrison Jr. is as advertised. Trey McBride continues his ascent here in year 3 to become one of the better tight ends in the NFL. That offensive line is good enough. And we come out of the season on the defensive side of the ball saying, hey, they might have a new pair of starting corners who are both on rookie contracts for the next few years, or they may have added 4 or 5 starters who are all in their 1st or 2nd year in the NFL. I think those are reasonable outcomes, and I think optimistic outcomes, and part of that best case scenario for the Cardinals. I don't know if they can sneak into the playoffs this year. Every year there's a team that goes worst to first. Every year there are teams that surprise. Could they be one of them? Maybe, but yeah, I just think they have such a ways to go on the defensive side of the ball, unless they really do get these young players to play really well early on.
Yeah, to me, they are that team that could surprise people and be that worst to first type of surprise package this year. We've said it before. Every year, there are teams that come out of nowhere and are a surprising force. And I think the Cardinals have the ingredients to be that team. Kyler Murray has the capacity to play like a top 10, maybe even a top 5 quarterback if he hits the high end of his range of outcomes. Marvin Harrison could make that kind of impact. Paris Johnson, a lot of people are very excited about what he can be at left tackle. If he ends up being their best offensive lineman at the most valuable spot, that's huge for them as well. So I can definitely imagine a world where this offense is really good and enough to drag this team to real success. And then, yeah, part of that best case sneaking into the playoffs would be that defense at least finding enough players to hold up its end of the bargain. And even if it's the weaker side, just not be the kind of liability that undermines everything that the offense is doing.
Worst case scenario. Okay, so you've got all the opposite of that. I mean, the biggest thing for me is Kyler. Again, if some of his regression in 2022 carries over, if did he need Kingsbury to hit those heights that he hit? Some of his limitations, did Kingsbury play to them better? Is Kyler going to struggle throwing the ball over the middle of the field? Again, I thought he showed some flashes toward the end of the season last year that were encouraging, but keeping an eye on that. And then on the defensive side of the ball, if no one emerges, then we're, back to the drawing board next year, or you're just hoping for 2nd and 3rd year jumps for a lot of that youth. I'll also throw out there, Marvin Harrison Jr. is just slow, is a bad case scenario, right? He didn't run because he's slow. And he's not as good as Malik Neighbors, and, him not doing anything during the offseason was a sign of things to come. I don't anticipate that, though. I think he'll be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, tracking data suggests that simply isn't the case for Marvin Harrison Jr. The guy has clocked, significant mile per hour figures on the field. So I doubt that's a reality. Real worst case scenario, I think, is, the defense is just a group of no names that can't perform at that level. And the offense isn't good enough to carry it, and this team just isn't particularly good again. But the genuine worst case scenario is probably some kind of, Kyler Murray related bad year for him, and we come out of the season less enthused about him than we are going into it. And given that he's been given that contract, and it was, the old regime, they sort of tied themselves to him last year and said, okay, we saw enough, he's our guy. But if they come out of the year and actually, it was a bad year for Kyler, we love Marvin Harrison, we love everything else, and Murray just wasn't able to hit the heights that we thought he was, and now we have a quarterback problem to solve as well. That would be, I think, their true worst case scenario.
Just touching on key position groups, for me, the whole defensive front for Arizona. Adding Darius Robinson, I think, is a step in the right direction, but last year they had to move Zaven Collins from regular linebacker to an edge rush, more of an edge rush presence. He's okay there. Gardeck is fun. He's fun for the show. He's the barbarian, but he's more of a number 2 complementary type of rusher. And then, the defensive interior, Justin Jones, Bilal Nichols, Roy Lopez, LJ Collier, Dante Stills. It's just not a group that even has any name that you're like, hey, yeah, of course, that guy's anchoring this group. So maybe Darius Robinson becomes that guy, but that's a group I think needs to probably play above previous levels if they're going to have any success.
Yeah, the only reason I don't agree with you as that being sort of the most problematic or the biggest key is that I think if you have a bad defensive front and a bad secondary, the bad secondary is the one that looks worse because it gets made look worse by the bad defensive front. It's just easier to sort of hide the bad defensive front. If you look at this cornerback group, it's really concerning. I mean, Sean Murphy-Bunting is the best player there, and I think he's playing out of position. He should be a permanent slot guy. They might need him to play outside simply because of lack of other options. Starling Thomas, even though he's the 5th iteration of Starling Thomas's, I'm not sure that he's the guy you can rely on being an outside high-end corner. And if you don't want those guys playing, then you're into those rookies that we talked about. You're into the Max Meltons, the Elijah Jones of the world, and those are not, first-round rookies. They're mid-round rookies. They're guys that you don't necessarily expect to play amazingly well right out of the gate. So, there a lot of youth there, right? All of these guys really are young. So maybe they find the kind of balancing act that enough of those young guys are able to actually surprise and be good players right away. It also, however, has the recipe for an absolute disaster there, given the fact that there isn't going to be a consistent source of pressure ahead of them.
All right, Sam, anything else on the Cardinals?
No, other than, they are my pick for a surprise package this season.
All right. Arizona, an Arizona fan over there. Let's go Los Angeles Rams now. Last year, when we were previewing, right around this time, they were one of the bigger stories to keep an eye on. Remember last year, they went into training camp, and it was just rookies everywhere. They couldn't even fill their positions. They felt like a team. They were coming off a disappointing 2022 season, which followed their Super Bowl win, and it felt like, well, maybe they're just starting to pay for all of those go for it seasons, and they're going with this massive youth movement. What can Matthew Stafford and Aaron Donald and Cooper Kupp, the stars, surrounded by all these rookies, what can they do? And before you know it, you have Puka Nacua, emerging as a future star. You have Kyron Williams emerging as the every down back that was like a complete difference maker for that offense. And they were competitive, and they make it to the playoffs. And now Aaron Donald's out, and we'll pay our respects to Donald in a second here. But now we're talking about a Rams team where so much of that youth last year stepped up. They've sprinkled in other free agents around them this year, and they look like a dangerous team, all while Aaron Donald retires this offseason. And, again, I would just want to, pay the respects to the impact that he's made throughout his career. But, fascinated by this Rams team as they head into next season.
Yeah, and the other element last year was the offensive line was pretty good. That on paper looked like a really problematic unit, and this is an offense that has been undone by problematic offensive lines in the past. Sean McVay's system does not appear to be the same as the Shanahan system in terms of how much it can protect that offensive line, and it has been undermined by that group in the past. But actually, their line last year was pretty good, and suddenly it gave them the platform to work from. Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua, Stafford, the entire offense was able to work, and they didn't kind of rest on those laurels. They went and upgraded that group this offseason. They targeted the offensive line. They didn't just relax and say, all right, it's better than people thought it was. We're good. They actually went and made sure that line can be that level again. So, yeah, I think the Rams are interesting because Puka Nacua was the surprise package, but is now absolutely a really important part of that offense. But the two most important players on the offense, Matthew Stafford, Cooper Kupp, they're each a year older, and Cooper Kupp is another year removed from that amazing season that he had where he, the record breaking type of season across the board where he just crushed all numbers from a wide receiver standpoint. He's getting on a bit. He's had injuries. Matthew Stafford obviously is getting on a bit and has also had injuries. So it's just that part of it, I think, is a little bit more fragile every year until they're able to, or until they, eventually end up moving on from Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, Stafford has been banged up and playing through injury, I think, for the majority of the last few years. Remember, last year they said he was the healthiest he's been. He did have a little thumb injury in the middle of the year, but I thought Stafford was awesome last year. I thought, since he's joined the Rams, other than 2022, when really the offensive line had a different iteration every single week, Stafford has played much more consistent football. He used to be a guy whose highs were unbelievably high, but the majority of his play was just a little bit below that top tier of quarterback. I thought Stafford last year, absolutely fantastic. He's been dealing with a little hamstring during preseason now in a camp. Something to keep an eye on, as you mentioned, as he's gotten older. He's had backs. He's had all sorts of different injuries to keep an eye on. I thought the way they built their offensive line was another interesting tidbit here. They found PFF favorite Kevin Dotson last year almost for nothing, and now he's making $16 million a year. They bring in Jonah Jackson for $17 million a year, really solidifying the two guard spots, $33 million per year across both guard spots. Move former guard Steve Avila into center after a good rookie season from him. They have a chance to be a very good offensive line, with maybe the biggest question being at left tackle there. But yeah, I think the offense will be good. And then those on-off splits last year of Kyren Williams, when he was on the field, this offense was completely different. Kyren Williams, the guy that didn't test well, he's not big, he doesn't do anything well on paper, doesn't look good on paper. He just gets out there, runs hard, runs their duo scheme that they leaned into a lot last year, just runs it extremely well. And the whole offense was like a whole different offense once he was out there last year. So yeah, I think the Rams will be good on that side of the ball, assuming health across the board here.
And now they have a potential Kyren Williams clone in Blake Corum out of Michigan, the rookie that a lot of people said reminded them of Kyren Williams. So they've got a backup Kyren Williams in case the first one goes down.
One other sneaky move here I think that's good is Jimmy Garoppolo being the backup quarterback. I don't know why I just anticipate Stafford to have injury issues throughout every single year at this point, but Garoppolo is a backup, man. I think he can come in, and Garoppolo's been he was outstanding in San Francisco statistically, right? Hit a ceiling, but you give him good playmakers, and I think he can produce. And again, if Puka Nacua is out there and Cooper Kupp, we didn't get to see a ton of those guys together, but when we did, those guys are tough to cover for opposing defenses. If Garoppolo has to play, I think he's got a chance, to hold the fort for a little bit if Stafford misses time. But defensively, I think the biggest story, Aaron Donald retires, and the Rams are just like, all right, we're going to draft 4 defensive linemen and do the what people call money ball in it, and replace them in the aggregate. Replace them with their first 2 picks of Jared Verse on the edge, Braden Fisk at defensive tackle, and then spend 2 more draft picks on the defensive line and say, hey, that will replace Aaron Donald. Is that enough, Sam? How good has Aaron Donald been, or what was he during his career?
Yeah, we can't replace Aaron Donald, but maybe half of the Florida State defensive line plus Kobe Turner equals Aaron Donald in the aggregate. That's the math. That's Brandon
right.
Beane's over there doing on the whiteboard. It's going to be fascinating. Like I feel like people got complacent with just how good and how ridiculous Aaron Donald was in his career. It's like that LeBron fatigue, right? You get bored of him being the best player in the league every single year, so you kind of stop giving him MVP. You start looking for reasons to go somewhere else. Whereas realistically, Aaron Donald was Defensive Player of the Year basically every year he was in the NFL, right? He only won 3 of them, but it wasn't because he didn't play at a Defensive Player of the Year standard every year. It was simply because nobody likes doing that. Nobody likes getting to the end of the year and go, well, obviously Aaron Donald is still Defensive Player of the Year. Same reason, other people won Coach of the Year, even though Belichick's just stacking Lombardi trophies on the shelf over there. Like, other people were winning. You get bored of giving it to the same guy. But what doesn't change is every year Aaron Donald is out there, teams are dedicating most of the week to game planning against Aaron Donald, right? Going into a game against the Rams, figuring out how do we stop this guy from ruining our day. And that was particularly evident, I think, within the division. Teams that played them multiple times a year. What the 49ers used to do in terms of game plan, there were whole sections of the Shanahan playbook that are simply not there for games against the Rams because they know you can't run this play against Aaron Donald. It won't work. And you have to run all these things so that he can't influence the play. All of that's gone now, right? Which means there's a whole section of playbooks that are now back on the table. And there's also a whole world of extra attention that used to go to Aaron Donald in terms of double teams, triple teams, plays going in his direction, extra help. That's now freed up to potentially go to Kobe Turner or simply be distributed around the defense. And now all of those other guys are going to have a harder job, right? The rookies, Byron Young on the outside, Kobe Turner on the inside, all of these guys have a more difficult job because Aaron Donald is not there every single snap to take all of that attention away from them. So I think we're going to get kind of reminded by his absence just how impactful he was, even if he wasn't getting 20 sacks in a season.
And we used to talk a lot about how you could quantify some of those things, which are tough to quantify, but you would see guys like Dante Fowler would come in and have a 15 sack season, which he had never approached anywhere else, or Leonard Floyd would come in and have a 10 or 12 sacks without great pass rush grades from PFF, but they'd finish plays because Donald was the disruptor up front. I just want to highlight Kobe Turner, who you keep mentioning, 3rd round pick last year. He had a PFF grade in the green as a pass rusher every game from week 12 on, finished with an 83.2 overall. Comparable type season to Jalen Carter, who obviously got a lot more hype as a 1st round pick, but Kobe Turner was an absolute find for the Rams last year. And it's a whole bunch of 1st and 2nd year defensive linemen now because you have Jared Verse coming off the edge, Byron Young in his 2nd year coming off the edge now. Braden Fisk, who the Rams said, hey, next year's 2nd rounder is worth moving up about 10 or 12 spots in the draft this year just to go get Fisk, a guy that I know some other teams were looking for in the 1st round. So I think the Rams look like they are literally adding 2 1st round defensive linemen. It depends on how you really view Fisk, but I think that's how they're viewing this.
You can argue that.
2 1st round linemen to come in and help replace Aaron Donald's production and build from that. So I think that's one of the bigger stories for the Rams is they get young on that side of the ball and spread the wealth, so to speak, rely on a lot more players than just Donald. And then you have in the secondary, you bring in a Tre'Davious White and taking a flyer on White, who has had so many injuries, but when he's healthy, he's one of the better corners in the NFL. Bringing Darius Williams back. A guy that's had a very productive career playing on the outside as an undersized corner. Rams have had success bringing some of their former players back after they go elsewhere. They weren't able to dabble in free agency the last couple off seasons because of all the go for it type of season. So I think it's a nice mix of some veterans and some youth on both sides of the ball here for the Rams.
Yeah, the Darius Williams edition I really like. They know where to play him. Outside corner, even though he's undersized, he's small, and he's been really good when he's played outside. So I think that's a great addition. I don't want to take anything away from the season Kobe Turner had last year. He was genuinely fantastic, but it's impossible to argue that his job is not going to be significantly more difficult this year because Aaron Donald is no longer there. Like that's the only reality that the Rams are dealing with, that everybody's gig is now more challenging because Donald is not there to individually wreck shop and take all of that extra attention from opposing schemes, from opposing offenses. Now that's on the table to be moved around to whoever's causing the most problems.
If we start to paint a best case scenario here for the Rams, again, I just want to highlight, how good I think Stafford was last year. And, when he is feeling it, he is able to make special throws, not just like, oh, this is this flashy thing. We're talking arm angles, tight window throws, creating plays that shouldn't be there. And last year, he had bad stats. I don't know, 6 or 7 games in the season. I always say, I don't look at stats. I didn't know his stats weren't that good. I was just watching him play, thinking this is the best ball he's played in a while. If Stafford keeps that up, and you do get a full year of Puka and a full year of Kupp, with this new offensive line, a full year of Kyron Williams, this offense has a chance to be special. And then if the youth comes together on the defensive side of the ball, I don't think they need to be great. They need to be good enough, And so I think there's a world where this Rams team, I'm not saying they're the 2021 Super Bowl champion Rams. I don't think they have that kind of depth on the roster, but it has a chance to be their best team in the best case scenario, their best team since the Super Bowl in 21.
Yeah, and actually, in a funny way, I think that kind of is their best case scenario because, realistically, their best case scenario is this team is a playoff team, and that's what we're looking for. But unlike a couple of other teams that's the best case scenario for, the Rams and particularly Matthew Stafford have shown that they're capable of getting to the postseason and then getting that run, right, of 4 games where you get the best version of Matthew Stafford. And the best version of Matthew Stafford is able to beat guys like Joe Burrow or Patrick Mahomes or, the best quarterbacks in the NFL, go on a run and beat teams in the postseason that maybe the team wouldn't beat if it was just baseline play, baseline talent level. So, we don't know that about Kirk Cousins yet, right? That was always the theory. That was what Minnesota potentially was buying into was, okay, let's get to the postseason all the time and then hope we get the best version of Kirk Cousins there. And 4 games of the best version of Kirk Cousins is championship level. The Rams, it's not a theory anymore. We saw it happen. Like the best Stafford played at a different level during that Super Bowl run than he played at the rest of that year. So I think that is their best case scenario is they make the playoffs and then catch Matthew Stafford at the best version of him. And that's enough to beat potentially better teams in the postseason and put themselves in a Super Bowl again.
On the worst case scenario side, it's unfair. We could say for every team, hey, if their starting quarterback gets hurt, of course, it just feels more relevant with Stafford, who's battled injuries, throughout his career. I think that is part of their worst case. And then, of course, again, we go back to the defensive side of the ball, the inability to replace Donald or the Tre'Davious White move that I love because he's a good player, but my brain doesn't always weigh the injury risk. There's been an injury risk there for Tre'Davious White. So some of their biggest players, Kupp, Stafford, White, have battled a lot of injuries over the last few years. I think that is a piece of their worst case scenario, in addition to maybe the youth movement on the defensive side of the ball in particular just doesn't hit the ground running right away.
Yeah, it's an easy out to say, an injury here or there sinks this team because it's true for most teams. But because of the injury history to Stafford and even beyond, the last couple of years, like that dude has battled injuries throughout his entire career. Like he's always been banged up. And now that Cooper Kupp has had a couple of injuries and that's becoming a bigger part of his profile, a significant injury to either Stafford or Cooper Kupp probably sinks this team over the course of the year. I know that they, Puka Nacua picked up a lot of the slack last season, but realistically, this team is it's a very hard ceiling, I think, if they don't have either one of those two guys for any period of time.
Key position group for the Rams. I mean, we've talked about it quite a bit, but I mean, it's the D line for me. I'm a Jared Verse fan. I thought I liked Laiatu Latu and Verse better than Dallas Turner. A lot of people had Dallas Turner as the top defensive player in the draft. I liked those other edges better. I think Verse's power is going to play. I like Fisk. He's a little undersized, but he just dominated the offseason from the workouts to the Senior Bowl and was very productive throughout his 5 years of college. So I think there's the right pieces there, but they have to produce. They have to produce early. There's a lot of pressure on that young defensive line, so I'll be keeping an eye on them as the key position group for the Rams this year.
The key position for me, I think, is left tackle Alaric Jackson. He's the one guy that still seems like a potential problem there. Now, we thought that a year ago, and he wasn't. Like, Alaric Jackson, I think, was much better last season than people were expecting him to be. He still wasn't great. He only gave up 1 sack, but he's had PFF pass blocking grades now for his sort of 1.5 starting seasons at 69, 67, below 70, which is okay. It's fine, but it's not great. And his run blocking grades have been much worse than that, below average. So I still feel like there's the potential to get, a not great run from Alaric Jackson, and suddenly Matthew Stafford is under pressure a lot coming off the blind side, and, it sort of, again, undermines the whole offense a little bit. But maybe I'm just being harsh on old Alaric Jackson, who is a young player who's been fine so far.
You have to pick someone. You had to pick someone as a key player here. So I think that's fair. All right, let's move on to the San Francisco 49ers. Big stories this offseason. Brandon Ayuk, is he going to be in San Francisco? Is he going to be traded? As of record time, he's a 49er. I don't know if he's locked up or not, but he's on the 49ers while we're talking right now. Whether he's there or not, they're still loaded. They're absolutely loaded. I think there are some places where they're a little more depleted than they were a year ago, but the Niners, a team that has a plethora of playmakers. Kyle Shanahan calling the plays, the best left tackle in football in Trent Williams. Brock Purdy, who, of course, he's a hot button issue. Where do the stats come from? Is it Kyle? Is it the playmakers? Well, Purdy has some slice of the pie, as you like to break it out. And he's heading into year 3, right? So there's a chance Purdy actually takes his game to a new level here for the Niners. And then defensively, still a ton of talent. I think the defensive line took a hit from a depth perspective. Eric Armstead, some injuries. Armstead off to Jacksonville, some other injuries and turnover there. But high level, what are you looking for here this year for the Niners?
Yeah, I mean, the 49ers should be looking to win a championship, right? That they've been at that level for a couple of years now. They haven't quite got there. Kansas City obviously beat them. They're looking to win one, and they have the talent to get it done. Like, okay, it's funny. The things like the Brandon Ayuk trade or no trade, it used to be, in-depth reports, player or people speaking on or off the record, all these kinds of things. Now it's, is he following them on Instagram again? That's our biggest question.
Very serious.
Brandon Ayuk has been spotted wearing 49ers merchandise. That's a critical thing. Obviously, he would debrand if he was planning on being traded somewhere else. He would be wearing neutral colors, no 49ers logos. But if he's in 49ers branded merch, he's leaning towards staying. That's where we are with this reporting world.
As a former minor league baseball player, we were not allowed to wear branded gear outside of the stadium. It was a finable offense. You did not tell the public that you played for the San Francisco Giants or the Seattle Mariners. You did not do that. That was frowned upon in a finable offense unless you were going to the gym with the team. That's what we did during the season.
Even the minor league stuff?
Yes. You do not flaunt your professional status as a baseball player. Just throwing that out there that, the football players are different. They're like, look, I play for the Niners. They do it differently. Just saying, as baseball players, always debranded, always, looked professional outside of the stadium.
Well, players, staff, everybody connected with an NFL organization. Like, part of the perk is you just have an endless wardrobe now of free crap, right?
Oh yeah, I get it.
I mean, our former colleague, our friend Bobby Slowick, we met him for breakfast in Cincinnati when the Texans were in town. He's just head to toe in Houston swag, right?
That would have been a fine.
Get a job
That's a
there.
Fine if he's a baseball player.
You get a job there, and somebody just goes, pick anything from this room. That's your wardrobe now. So yeah, of course you take advantage of that. Anyway, so theoretically, Brandon Ayuk is still there. And if Brandon Ayuk is still there, that does give the 49ers the best, the most diverse and formidable group of playmakers, I guess, top to bottom, right? Whether it's running back Christian McCaffrey, tight end George Kittle, wide receiver Brandon Ayuk, weapon X Deebo Samuel, guy without position, Kyle Juszczyk, fullback. Like, they just have playmakers everywhere, and that's not even factoring in, first round pick, Ricky Pearsall, the wide receiver that presumably is some kind of Ayuk insurance. Jacob Cowing, mid-round wide receiver that was a star in preseason games. Like, they are so loaded with these guys that can make plays and cause problems. And Brock Purdy has already shown that he can distribute the ball around, that he can make plays when things break down and add some value to the Shanahan offense. The Shanahan offense itself is arguably the biggest cheat code in the NFL scheme-wise. Theoretically, we assume they're going to get Trent Williams back at some point. Again, he's at time of recording, he's unhappy, but is not, I don't think, thought to be a risk for the season. It's not going to, he's going to get there at some point. And that's the best offensive lineman in the NFL. So this group has already shown its championship caliber. Maybe the offensive line as a whole is a little bit of a concern, but the Shanahan offense has always hidden that well. Everybody else is able to overcome that. this still should be one of the best offenses and one of the best teams in the NFL.
Yeah, the offensive line had the 9th worst pass blocking grade by PFF grade last year. And so that's why I want to give Brock Purdy some credit here. I want to add what might be a scary thought here for Niners opponents. I think Brock Purdy's getting better. I think there's room to improve. And I also think he deserves a ton of credit leading up to this. Not all the credit. I don't think he's a 115 passer rating guy or whatever he ended up with last year. I think it was lower. I don't think he's that. I don't think he's going to average 9 yards per attempt for the rest of his career in perpetuity. But Purdy has run that offense extremely well. He had an 87.4 PFF grade last year. Remember, we used to always give Shanahan the credit for taking a 78 grade from Garoppolo and spinning that into a top 5 offense. That's the magic of Shanahan. But Purdy is playing as well as any Shanahan quarterback since the 2016 Matt Ryan MVP caliber season, right? Matt Ryan was already a good quarterback, he gets Shanahan, they've got playmakers, and then boom, it's like one of the best offenses of all time. That's the magic. I think Purdy has a chance to continue to improve, right? He's got some improvisational skills outside of structure. He doesn't have the best arm in the world, but this is the time of the career where if you just add like few extra RPMs, a little bit more to the arm, he might have a little bit more in the tank. And he did play better in the second half of the season last year, Purdy, even though he's a little up and down on the playoff run. So I think there's actually room to improve for Brock Purdy, in addition to, hey, by the way, good luck covering Deebo Samuel. Brandon Ayuk was playing like a top 5 receiver last year. That was another new wrinkle that they added last year. By the way, Ayuk's just going to play like a top 5 wide receiver. But Deebo and his hybrid ability, Kittle, one of the top 2 tight ends in the NFL still, and Christian McCaffrey, the clear top running back, I think, as far as an all-around threat goes. So you have all those pieces, and I think Purdy is incrementally improving his game, and there's a chance that he takes another step this year, despite some of the preseason stuff. He's thrown too many picks, and he's maybe taking some chances in ways that he wouldn't, but I think he's ready to take another step and maybe make the Shanahan offense all the more dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, it's the most versatile offense in the NFL in terms of the number of guys you have to worry about. Nobody else can boast that array of weapons and that many ways to cause you problems, and that's an issue.
On the defensive side of the ball, I mentioned Eric Armstead being out. Drake Jackson's out for the season on the edge. You still have an elite Nick Bosa. I'm a little more concerned about the defensive line than I have been in previous years. Remember last year, the Niners looked loaded, and then, oh, by the way, we're going to bring in, Randy Gregory and Chase Young. And, even though they didn't all necessarily dominate or anything, they were just so deep on the line. And Chase Young was a good, solid player down the stretch. He wasn't great. But I worry about the depth here on the defensive line compared to previous seasons where it's like, hey, you have 8 dudes who can get after the quarterback. Is it just Nick Bosa and Javon Hargrave at this point? And now you're relying on, Leonard Floyd to be the other edge opposite Nick Bosa. He's okay. He's never been a dominant pass rusher. Is that going to be an issue here for the Niners? Because it looks like the thinnest defensive line I think that they've had in a few years.
I mean, it's so top heavy, right? Like Nick Bosa is a defensive player of the year candidate in any given season. Javon Hargrave is one of the best interior pass rushers in all of football. Run defense isn't as good anymore, but his pass rush is consistent and formidable. And then, Leonard Floyd, I think, is a solid player, but isn't really moving the needle compared with those other two. And anybody else is like a bonus if they do anything. I mean, new guys like Yetur Gross-Matos, Jordan Elliott, Malik Collins, these are sort of underachieving guys that have talent. Like that, it's really just relying on those stars. If Nick Bosa doesn't fire on all cylinders for whatever reason, then suddenly this defensive front is not great. But both him and Hargrave have been consistently really good for them. So as long as they have those two, it's enough, I think, to still be a real impact area for this defense.
That's the key position group for me, man, is the defensive line. And some of those guys you mentioned, Jordan Elliott, who looked like a really productive player as a 3rd-round pick coming out of Missouri, never really found it with the Browns. I mean, it's just trying to find, I think, some compliments up front to Bosa and Hargrave rushing the passer. But you're still talking about a defense. I keep joking about how the Niners have a top 5 player at so many different positions. You get the best linebacker in the NFL in Fred Warner. Dre Greenlaw's fantastic once he's back from injury. Travarius Ward has become one of the better corners in the NFL. And it feels like with, some of their offseason additions and the way Ward has played the last couple of years, that they're trying to play a little bit more man coverage. Renardo Green, their second round pick, excels in press man. They've got potential on the back end. There's a lot of safety versatility there with Hufanga being healthy, and Jair Brown last year showed some flashes. So I think my questions on the defensive line are going to be made up for with the way the secondary has come together for the Niners. They have a lot of versatility on the back end now.
No, they do. Like, it's a good unit. I think maybe it's not, obviously Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, that's the star power and the name recognition power of that defense. Both those guys are superstars. But outside of that, there's a lot of guys that don't necessarily have the name recognition, but are actually good, solid players. And that's most of that defense, really. So, yeah, I think that defensive group is going to be good again. And because that offense is so dominant, so formidable, like, it doesn't need to be amazing.
With Steve Wilkes moving on, fired this offseason as defensive coordinator, Nick Sorensen taking over. So, somewhat new system here. We'll see what that looks like. But again, on paper, it looked like the Niners are saying, we're not playing as much zone. We're going to play more man. We're going to get after it, be aggressive in the secondary. I'm looking forward to seeing what that looks like. Best case scenarios. Go ahead.
They've had a lot of turnover from the defensive coaching point of view over the last few years. I mean, obviously, a lot of it is because of good things, right? Robert Saleh hired away to be a head coach. DeMeco Ryans hired away to be a head coach. Steve Wilkes. And so it's like the fourth guy that's been at the helm of that defense in basically 4 years. That is a lot of kind of chopping and changing, even though every one of them has had a lot of success along the way.
I was about to say, I mean, the best case scenario seems pretty clear. They win a Super Bowl. You know, last year they were plays away. They lost in overtime, literally plays away, both, in regulation and in overtime from winning. They could put it all together. And, part of that is Shanahan getting over some of those. I don't know if it's fair or not, but the big game hump, right? Whether it's with Atlanta as an offensive coordinator or 2 Super Bowls with the Niners, just getting over the hump. But every time Shanahan has had a healthy quarterback, they've been in the NFC Championship or better since he's been in San Francisco.
Yeah, they're definitely a team where Super Bowl is easily within the range of positive outcomes. That's their best case, is they finally get one. Worst case scenario, I've seen people suggesting that the 49ers could miss the playoffs. I feel like their worst case scenario, again, outside of like catastrophic injury to critical player, right? Brock Purdy breaks his leg week 1. Outside of something like that, I feel like even the worst case 49er season probably has them sneaking into the postseason and being a wild card team.
Yeah, I think they're too good to have, again, injury aside. For them to have that disaster, it would take Brock Purdy playing like Mr. Irrelevant, right? I mean, I feel like we all do this as fans or as analysts, where you say, well, this is what I thought the guy was. That was 3 years ago. And you, in the back of your mind, you're like, well, what if he goes back to where he was 3 years ago? And it usually doesn't happen. Usually a guy doesn't have 2 great seasons and then all of a sudden looks like a 7th round pick again. It would almost take something like that. Or, Ayuk is gone and, everything else just kind of falls apart. But yeah, I just think they're too good. They are too good. And, worst case scenario is just probably more angst in the playoffs, right? More, what about this play? What about that play? Missed opportunities, dropped interception here or there, missed throw here or there. The same stuff, I think, that has, haunted Kyle through the years.
Yeah, I mean, I guess. So I think their worst case scenario for 2024 still involves the playoffs. I think they're that good. Yeah. Their true worst case scenario, I guess, is that Brock Purdy does have a weird season that only adds to the confusion of how much of it is him versus everything else. And now you are staring down the barrel of the contract negotiation this is the only problem with that whole idea of the credit pie chart, right? How much goes to the quarterback, the receivers, the offensive line, the coach. It doesn't matter as long as they're all together on the same roster, right? Who cares? As long as they're all there, the whole of the pie stays the same. The only time it matters is when you now need to assign a dollar figure to it. Like when Brock Purdy comes along and says, okay, my contract is up. I now want $60 million a year. That's fine if Brock Purdy is taking up a huge amount of that credit pie and he's the guy driving the bus. If it turns out that Brock Purdy is actually a passenger and everybody else is a way bigger piece of that credit, well, now that becomes a problem. So anything that muddies that picture, I think, is a worst case scenario for the 49ers long term.
You're right, because when you're in it, everybody's like, who cares? They're producing. Who cares? They're producing. Well, at some point you have to care because you're trying to put a value on the player.
Right.
At some point it does matter. I don't know why I feel like I'm leaning toward Brock being the dude, right? Being that guy. I don't know if he's going to be the quote elite quarterback or whatever it might be. But I know early in a lot of careers, whether it was Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger, Russell Wilson, there are other quarterbacks who won a lot early, and people tried to take credit away from them, right? Well, the defense did this, or there was this coach, or it was this supporting cast, and I think all those guys proved over time like they were the guy, right? Russ had an outstanding run despite what's happening right now. Roethlisberger, Hall of Fame career. Is Brock Purdy just another one of those guys where he was a big piece of it the whole way, not the whole piece, a big piece of it, and he'll continue. So that'll be definitely a story to watch. And what you said is if he has a Tua-like season where it's like kind of front runner-ish, and once you need to get over the hump, it feels like he's not bringing you there, it will make for some off-season questions when you're thinking about putting a $60 million in front of his next salary. So did you have a key position group to highlight? I was talking defensive line. Did you have anything else you wanted to add on that?
It's still the offensive line to me. Like, I keep doing this, and yet eventually I'm going to have to accept that it just doesn't matter what the shape of your offensive line is in a Shanahan offense, right? Whether all three of those systems right now, Houston, Miami, and San Francisco, is any single one of those offensive lines even average? Like, every single one of them on paper, I think, is below average or worse. And it doesn't matter. They had the three best offenses in the NFL in terms of yards per attempt last season. They're all their quarterbacks look good. The offenses were good. Like, it just doesn't seem to make a difference, right? So, but I keep looking at this and like, okay, Trent Williams is amazing at left tackle. And basically they took him out of the lineup for a preseason game. And it's like, this offensive line is garbage. I just feel eventually that's got to cause problems, right? And it hasn't for a lot of games. But are we overdue, or is this just the dynamic?
It's the other thing that's made Kyle Shanahan so special, and in all the iterations of his offense, is we've seen it with quarterbacks. Oh, this guy elevates quarterbacks, or you made Jimmy Garoppolo one of the better statistical quarterbacks of all time in the few years he was in your system. But oh, by the way, you could do that with an offensive line too. Like, there's not a history of good offenses overcoming poor pass blocking. And this is using the baseline of like PFF grades do a really good job of describing what's happening on the field. And that's what's happened, right? They've given up a lot of pressure other than Trent Williams over the last few years. They've given up a lot of quick losses, but that's where scheming and the way they create angles and space in the offense, that's where, again, I think Kyle just deserves so much credit for overcoming that. So you could go make that mistake again this year and question them, but I'm just like, hey, as long as Trent's healthy, they'll sort it out. All right, let's wrap it up with the Seattle Seahawks. Then we'll get into prediction time for the NFC West. Seahawks, Geno Smith back again at the helm, and a team that rejuvenated Geno Smith a couple years ago, and made them a playoff team and a fringe playoff team over these last couple of years. I'm real interested to see what happens on the defensive side of the ball for the Seahawks. Mike McDonald's coming in, Pete Carroll stepping away after a great run in Seattle, but this defensive front hasn't been what it was early in Pete Carroll's tenure. Feel like I've been waiting for that to get back, and I think this is the best defensive line they've had in a while. And then McDonald's coming in, bringing that Ravens defense with him, and some of their ability to disguise pressure. I'm real intrigued by Seattle this year and how quickly they hit the ground running on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, generally, I'm not an advocate for, and in fact, I rail against this idea of getting bored of a good coach. And, you've not won anything. You haven't won a championship in a long time. It's time to get rid of you, even though you're consistently good year in, year out. And I sort of feel for Pete Carroll because ultimately, he was kind of made a scapegoat, and it was sort of suggested to him seemingly that, hey, Pete, it's time that we mutually parted ways, by which I mean you need to leave. So you need to you need to agree to mutually leave because we're done with you now. That appears to be basically the dynamic that happened there in Seattle. And that's unfortunate because Pete Carroll has been a legend for this team, did incredible things, built incredible things, did win, and they've been good every year. But I do feel very excited about what the new regime is. You know, the fact that they have gone from Pete Carroll to now bringing in McDonald, bringing in that defensive scheme, that new way of doing things, what that can do for the personnel that they have. And you start looking at this roster, and top to bottom now, it looks really good. Like, they're one of the teams where when you start pulling up the depth charts and you start going down the personnel, I'm surprising myself by just how good this team is top to bottom and getting progressively more excited as we get towards the season of what the Seahawks could actually do this year.
Then you throw in the fact that I saw them in person at joint practices, and
right.
You got to overreact to what you saw in person. That defense was really good when I was watching. Red zone day, man, they were locked down in the red zone against the Titans in their joint practices. The other guy, Reek Woolen, in person, Sam, you can't see it on film. You weren't there. But in person, the 6'4" frame and the way he moves and the physicality, it is legit. And so, look, I'm only joking about the in-person stuff a little bit, but Woolen and Witherspoon as a 1-2 punch in the secondary. We all love Devin Witherspoon as a player, and then you think about how Mike Macdonald used a guy like Kyle Hamilton, who's a safety by name, but became his do-everything slot, move-around type of player. Witherspoon's a different position by name. He's an outside corner who has a similar skill set, right? He's going to stick his nose in there against the run, and he's going to tackle, play man-to-man, play zone, can do it all. So a lot of good pieces here for the Seattle Seahawks.
There really are. I mean, earlier in the offseason, you like the roster top to bottom, but the one area, the Achilles heel, was like the interior of that offensive line. And you looked at that and you said, man, the whole thing could unspool there, right? No names at guard, no center to speak of. Like, this could be a real problem. We were saying they needed to draft an offensive lineman in the first round just to plug somebody into that gap. And yet that's not what the Seahawks do from a personnel standpoint. They don't think interior offensive linemen essentially are worth first-round picks. And they had the patience. They went in a different direction. And they end up getting a guy in Christian Haynes much lower down the draft who could easily come in and start quickly. And then they come back later on in the sort of post-draft, free agent landscape and get Connor Williams. And okay, Connor Williams is coming off a torn ACL. We don't know if he's going to be 100%, but Connor Williams has been one of the better centers in the league in the last couple of years. So almost immediately, that offensive line starts to take on a completely different complexion, added to the talent that they have out wide, DK Metcalf, Jackson Smith and Jigba. Like, the talent is there for this group to be really good on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, there's still some what-ifs up there for the offensive line. I agree with everything you said. I love the way they played the draft and got Haynes in the third round because it allowed them to get Byron Murphy in the first round, who already looks like he has a chance to be a 3-down game changer at a defensive tackle position where the market is just through the roof. So Murphy becomes just really good value at pick 16 where they were. So let's talk about the offense really quick here. Offensively, the two tackles, Charles Cross, Abe Lucas, really nice rookie seasons in 2022. Some injury issues last year. If they're back healthy, Connor Williams, who you mentioned, Christian Haynes, I presume steps in a little bit. They've got to creep back toward average or better potential on the offensive line. They need some of those what ifs to come good there. And then I look at Geno Smith throwing to DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, just one of the more consistent 1-2 punches in the league the last 5 or 6 years. And then Jackson Smith and Jigba added to that group, or a Jake Bobo added to that group. Bobo continues to defy the odds as a playmaker. Noah Fant, Pharaoh Brown at tight end. It's a good group of playmakers, Sam. I think JSN has a chance to maybe this is the year where he starts to cut into Tyler Lockett's production, cut into his playing time, and give them that replacement option as Lockett gets a little bit older here.
And the backfield as well. Kenneth Walker, Zach Charbonnet, that's a phenomenal 1-2 punch. Like, this team absolutely has talent.
Defensively, again, I think it's the best defensive line since the Legion of Boom years. It's, add Murphy in the first round. They spent a second rounder on Leonard Williams, and you could raise the question: is that worth it? A second round pick for Leonard Williams. Is Williams one of the biggest impact defensive linemen in the league? I don't. He's in the top 15 or so, I would say. He just brings an incredible durability. You're going to get 800 to 900 snaps out of him every year. He's a solid run defender, play up and down the defensive line, multi-gaps. I think you know what you're going to get from Leonard Williams. So they're paying for that certainty. You pair him with Byron Murphy. Jonathan Hankins comes in as just an absolute monster at nose tackle. They had a lot of success in Dallas against the run when he was out there. So an intriguing group of interior players. And then, the seemingly annual stream of second round edge rushers, Boye Mafe and Derek Hall and Darrell Taylor. I mean, they should have enough juice off the edge. I think when you put it all together, it's a really good defensive front for the Seahawks here.
Well, just like everybody along that front takes on a different, you have to sort of view them through a different lens now that we're bringing in this Baltimore Ravens defense. They are going to be more multiple. They're going to move around a lot more. They're going to confuse teams because of the way that defense creates pressure. So everybody that we're looking at, you have to start thinking about in a slightly different light. Are we going to get a different version of Leonard Williams where that versatility really comes into its own and becomes a real positive for them? Byron Murphy, rather. This is a guy who's a 3-tech body playing nose tackle effectively for Texas, right? Same idea. Is he going to be able to move all around this defensive front? Are we going to get breakout years from Boye Mafe or Uchenna Nwosu on the edge or, some of those guys? So there's a lot of intriguing players, guys to be optimistic about in a vacuum. But then when you couple it with the defense that's coming over, I think there's reasons to be very excited by what this defensive line could be.
Yeah, and then you pair that with what I said in the secondary. I'm excited about Devin Witherspoon in year 2 for him. With Reek Woolen was the kind of the epitome of the cornerback fluctuation. Right, had all those interceptions as a rookie. Still has his ups and downs in coverage, but he was supposed to be a project. Right, he was supposed to be this former wide receiver who was not a very good football player at UTSA, and then had one of the best combines of all time. No exaggeration, 6'4", runs in the 4.2s, change of direction's great, length is great. It was supposed to take him some time, and he looked good as a rookie. But he was supposed to be starting to become good now. And again, it's one in person, Sam, against the Titans, but it looks like he might be taking his game to the next level. He has a chance to be special. I'll just say this. He has a chance to be special any given year with that type of skill set.
I mean, look, Richard Sherman pulled up a single play from him against Calvin Ridley in the preseason, right? And Calvin Ridley is one of the best route runners in the NFL who understands, subtle movements, how to set up defensive backs. And it was just this great rep of Reek Woolen shadowing him down the field, not panicking when he gave up position right off the line, staying sort of slightly behind, just not quite in trail position, but not quite in phase either. Just being patient, right? And understanding that with his speed, his makeup speed and his wingspan, just the target area that he presents, he has so much more room for error. He can let Calvin Ridley get a hair ahead of him without panicking. Doesn't have to overextend to get back in phase and give up a comeback route, give up an underneath break. He can just be patient and essentially eliminate any window that the quarterback has to work from. It was just a great rep against a really high level route runner. And, perfectly shows what that skill set, what his physical traits allow him to do in any given play. And it's one rep, it's, one day of in practice, but this is why this guy has, off the charts potential.
Just want to add a friend of the show, Julian Love, to the mix as well. Another guy that, played corner in college and has moved around as a safety and as a nickel in the NFL. So I think the more versatile pieces you're giving Mike McDonald on the defensive side, the better. And so many of the players in Seattle secondary have the ability to play inside, play outside, play safety. So I'm intrigued by it, man. Best case scenario for Seattle. What do you think they can do here?
So best case scenario, I actually think the Seahawks are a surprise contender. Not just, contender for postseason, but a real contender. That roster is crazy good. The talent is there. I actually think I'm already saying that the Cardinals could be a surprise team and shock people. I think the Seahawks could as well. That team could really be legit if those things come together.
Check the mic, Sam, is so positive. I like it.
Just
very
NFC West, Sam.
NFC West, Sam. No, I mean, I'm with you, man. I mean, just to talk about Geno Smith for a minute here, he's been, you kind of wait for the regression too. Like we did that in 2022, his first full year as a starter. When does he regress back into a backup? And it never really happened. I thought last year there was some ups and downs. There were times where, he wasn't great. I think he's got to get better in the red zone. He's got, the most turnover worthy plays in the red zone over the last couple of years. But Geno can make some special throws. And he's got that, I hate saying it factor, but he's got that once you start doubting him factor. Once you do start to think like I was, when does the regression happen? When does he come back down to earth? He seems to step up his game even more. He does handle adversity extremely well. I think that bodes well for Seattle. And yeah, I'm with you. That best case, maybe they sneak into the NFC Championship. I think they can I feel better about Seattle making a run this year maybe than the last couple of years because this feels like the building blocks are being put in place. The worst case scenario, though, kind of coincides with that. It's just the unknown, I think, of the coaching switch, right? It's Mike Macdonald's coming in. If you remember Macdonald's system with Baltimore, a bunch of busted coverages those first few weeks. Like it took them a little bit to get going. I don't know if that's going to be a feature of this defense again, but that's probably part of the worst case scenario is maybe the personnel looks good on paper, but it's not a great fit for McDonald's. Maybe we're overrating the fit. And maybe my Geno doubting comes true here, right? It's like, oh, he does regress back and those turnover worthy plays in the red zone get caught more often this year. I think that's all part of the potential worst case here for Seattle.
I feel like they have a pretty high floor, though, right? Like even their worst case scenario is just missing the playoffs. Like you're in the hunt until the final week of the season and you come up a game or two short. Like that's the worst case scenario for the Seahawks. Like I think they have actually one of the higher floors of any team in the league.
Position group wise, is there one you're looking at as a key position or player for the season?
I think it is that defensive line, not necessarily an area of concern, but just seeing how that group is going to be within this defense. How much can he turbocharge their success? Who's going to emerge as a surprise player that's actually way better in this system than they were in the previous one? And does it become a real strength under Mike Macdonald and his new defense?
I'm going to go back to the offensive line. I'm with you. I'll be watching the defensive line closely, but O-line wise, they're banking on Laken Tomlinson coming in. He's coming off of his two worst seasons, essentially. Really only played his best football under Kyle Shanahan with the Niners. I don't know if that's something to be concerned about if you're banking on him at left guard and then right guard, Christian Haynes. I think, they have Anthony Bradford battling Christian Haynes probably for the right guard spot. Haynes could play left guard as well. They've moved him around, but Haynes as a player who I really liked and to repeat from earlier, Seattle played it well, getting him in the third round, not necessarily forcing because they didn't have a second round pick, right? And they didn't want to force a guard or a center in the first round. They get Haynes in the third. So I think, just shoring up the guard position as a whole is going to be huge for this team, keeping pressure from Geno, opening up that run game. So I'll be keeping an eye on the interior of the offensive line for the Seahawks. All right, man, let's do some predictions here for the NFC West. We've been waiting to the end on all of these shows. So give me your projected order here in the NFC West.
This, I think, is one of the toughest divisions in the league to call a 1 through 4 order. I think the 49ers are 1, and then after that, like all bets are off. It gets chaotic. I'm going to go with 49ers number 1. Arizona are my surprise. Arizona are the team I'm going to pick to shock everybody, go from the bottom to the top and actually be a real force this season. Arizona 2, Seattle number 3, and then the Rams bringing up the rear. The Rams propping up the division.
Well, on previous shows, I think we were identical in the NFC South. A couple of the divisions, we were very close. This will at least be different after the Niners. I got the Niners number 1. I'll take the Seahawks number 2. We were just talking them up, and I feel good about that. The more we talked up their roster and what they are capable of, I'll take the Rams 3, and then the Cardinals 4. I'm being short-sighted again, and as much as the Cardinals might have some optimism at the end of the season, I just not seeing it yet. I'm just not seeing it yet. So I'll go, Niners, Seahawks, Rams, and then the Cardinals.
Okay. I was trying to wonder what actually is the chalk order for this division. It's probably flipping your middle teams, right? It's 49ers, Rams, Seahawks, Cardinals would be the chalk pick.
Chalk almost certainly is like last year. I think the odds usually lean into last year. Yeah, unless there's like major turnover. Somebody do a study on that. Unless there's major turnover at the quarterback position, I think most of the time going into the season, because those are all data-driven approaches, and the data usually leans on last year, which is why I often lean on last year. But I like your aggressiveness there, Sam, taking the Cardinals to make that leap. So that'll do it for us today on the NFC West. We appreciate everybody for tuning in, for listening. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, right? This is all new. Check the mic. If you haven't subscribed already, all sorts of great content coming. We're going division by division, previewing the 2024 season. And then opening week is where we really hit our groove, Sam. We'll have a very special guest on our Wednesday episode. And then the Thursday of every week, we preview every game. The Monday after, all the Sunday action, we review every game. So make sure you're with us all season here on Check the Mic. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again next time.